All right, welcome back. I'm Austin Westfall. You're watching Live Now. These are the images from the latest strike as Secretary Hegseth has announced the launch of an operation targeting narco-terrorist networks across Latin America. Hegseth says that U.S. Southern Command and Joint Task Force Southern Spear will lead a mission to defend the homeland and dismantle narco-terrorist networks across the Western Hemisphere. The U.S. has carried out at least 20 strikes on alleged drug trafficking boats in recent months. You're looking at the 20th strike on your screen right now. The Department of Defense just releasing this. I believe it was U.S. Southcom sending this out just within the last couple of hours here. Retired Marine Intelligence Officer Hal Kempfer is here. He previously worked on the war on drugs under U.S. Southern Command. And Hal, I read that the Navy has said that it will be using long-dwell robotic surface vessels, small robotic interceptor boats, and robotic air vessels. My question for you is, how have our military's drug enforcement capabilities evolved since you worked on the war on drugs?
Well, Austin, I worked on the war on drugs back in the 90s. So the technology across the board has evolved. Literally, it's, the online capability to do these things, but we didn't have, this satellite, persistent satellite communications program that we have now, that's commercially available, I should say. We didn't have a lot of things that we have now. And of course, the ships, the planes, and obviously everything that's robotic, everything you call drones, whether it's on the water, under the water, flying over the water, whatever. These are new capabilities. These are things that we just didn't have. So it's a tremendous capability to maintain a persistent maritime domain awareness in and around Venezuela, and certainly in the Eastern Pacific, which is another area where we've been doing these kinetic strikes against narco-terrorist boats and semi-submersibles. But the other thing too is the missiles that we have and the ability to put forces in there faster, quicker, better than we had before. So I think it's changed a lot. And what's fascinating to me is that the Joint Task Force concept, and I think they're going to come up with another name for the Joint Task Force other than just for Southern Spear. That's kind of seems to be a working name right now. But this Joint Task Force is being formed on the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, 2MEF, out of Camp Lejeune. They also have a persistent relationship with U.S. Southern Command as a component command as well. And that this is going to probably change things. And you wouldn't, if it was just going to be air and sea, I don't know that they would have set the JTF under the Marine Corps, under a Marine Command. But that tells me that they're looking at air, sea, and possible land. Because, well, frankly, that's what Marines do. We cover all warfighting domains.
What are narco-terror networks? Lay it out for anybody who needs to have it explained to them in layman's terms. We know what narco means, but what's the terrorist piece of it?
Well, the terrorist piece are that we've looked at what they do, and they do some pretty horrific things. And a lot of times they do stuff for political effect, too. If you look at what's going on in Venezuela, the Venezuelan government, the Maduro regime, is seen as inextricably linked, if you will, to the narco-terrorists. It's considered a narco state because of the interwoven ties financially, operationally, and every other way with the narcotics cartel. So in that regard, is it a political entity? Does it do things for political purposes? And you can't escape the answer of yes. And if they're doing extreme violence in the pursuit of a political objective or a political purpose, well, then you kind of start getting into the definition of terrorism as it's understood in the international system. The other thing, too, is they have done things like assassinations. If you look at what's going on in Mexico with the drug cartels, they certainly, in all levels of war fighting, if you will, in all sorts of types of targeting, weapons usage stuff, they seem to be very much in the mix of what we see. And of course, they're very much mixed into the political spectrum as well. So in all those regards, we've seen that. We also look at the number of deaths that are being imposed on the U.S. or the U.S. is experiencing every year from this horrific drug trade. And so if you look at the death toll, you look at what they're doing, you look at their political influence or political manifestations, you start to end up with they're not just a criminal organization, they're actually much bigger than that. And that's why we designated them a terrorist group, just like we designated ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other groups.
I was reading about the aircraft carrier that we've sent. The U.S. will use warships in the region, including the USS Gerald R. the Gerald R. Ford. Tell us about that aircraft carrier. It's the largest in the world, and what will it be doing to help our forces out there?
It's the largest, it's the newest. It has a lot of aircraft that are, some are like older F-18s, but they have a lot of newer aircraft as well that they can use. And it has basically an electric, um, the old pressure-based system, hydraulic-based system that they had for launching aircraft. This one is a system that's based on magnetic force to shoot it out, and so they can launch and recover aircraft a lot faster. So they can do more sorties. And when you get into doing strike missions, it's not just the planes or how much they carry. It's how fast can you get those things launched in the air, putting bombs on target, if you will, and then getting back to the carrier to get recovered, rearmed, and then sent on another mission. That's where the Gerald R. Ford has an advantage over some of our older carriers, is it has this ability to keep a very high sortie rate going. So if we're hitting targets, and we want to hit a lot of targets as fast as we can in close correlation, if we were inclined to hit targets in Venezuela, for example, we would want to have it to be a stunning attack with a lot of damage and a lot of an ability to impede the opposition force, the enemy, if you will, to reorganize. Then you'd want that high sortie rate. That's what the Gerald R. Ford gives us, is that really high sortie rate.
So let's talk about something that CBS had. They reported that President Trump was briefed on potential options for operations in Venezuela, including possible land strikes, but no final decisions have been made yet. Hal, does it feel like the U.S. is preparing for such an operation?
They're doing everything you would expect if we were going to do an operation. Now, what we don't have, even with that Marine Expeditionary Unit out there, we don't have a large amphibious force afloat that could do an amphibious invasion, an assault on Venezuela and overthrow their military capabilities. But we do have an ability to degrade them to a point where their military and security apparatus could literally collapse. And I think that's what we're looking at, is doing something more in the collapse realm, and probably something on the side where we're working with opposition leaders. And the president kind of alluded to that he had authorized the CIA to engage in some sort of covert activity, that we have folks that we've probably already contacted, things being put in place, that when the Maduro regime collapses, if you will, falls apart, that others would step in to take control. And likely the Maduro will be handed over to us for being extradited to the U.S. to face trial. Although, as we've seen in the past, when dictators tend to be deposed, a lot of times they don't make it. So there may be no Maduro alive to be basically extradited to the U.S.
So people that have been following these drug strikes, they might not know the history behind the Maduro regime. Why does the U.S. consider Venezuela and Maduro's government a narco state?
Well, and the short answer is because it is a narco state. It basically, they used to produce a lot of oil, and they still produce quite a bit, but it's down about a fourth of what it was before all these things, sort of began. I think they were doing like 3.2 billion barrels of oil a day that they were exporting. Now they're down to less than 700,000, and I think it's actually less than that. And so that oil economy has dramatically decreased, and the revenue associated with has decreased. At the same time, he's a strong, you could say far left, if you will, socialist, communist. Chavez, his predecessor, same way, very anti-business. They've basically gutted the private sector economy down in Venezuela. A fourth of the population, some would say a third of the population, but a fourth of the population definitely has fled under his regime and under the regime of his predecessor, which is an enormous exodus of the population. And they've opened the doors to the cartels. So they produce the drugs up in that Andean area. Colombia is very famous, but there's other areas in Peru and stuff where they produce where the coca trees grow, where they can harvest the coca leaves, and they produce cocaine, and then they can ship it to Venezuela, which is pretty much a narco transit country, which is you can come in, they will help you with the drugs. The government forces will actually work with you if you're a drug cartel, and then you can ship it out. And that's what we're trying to stop, is this massive flow of drugs going through Venezuela. It's not just to the U.S. that where it's going; it's also going to Western Europe and other countries as well. And so we're trying to stop this, and that's why we call them a narco. That's why we call it a narco state. And because of the effects of what they're doing within the country and outside the country, the degree of violence involved, the political aspect of it, that's why we've designated them as a terrorist group versus just a violent criminal group, which is what they were before.
Hal Kempfer is a retired Marine intelligence officer and the host of the Strat podcast. You can listen to Strat anywhere podcasts are available. Hal, good to see you, and we'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Thank you, Austin.
Thanks. All right, 7:25 in the nation's capital. Let's hit a commercial break. Our coverage continuing in a moment.